Cary Stayner, a shocking serial killer whose crimes mystified law enforcement.
To do that to those innocent people without any reason, he's an evil person, there's no question about it.
With a highly disturbed childhood, even intervention by experts couldn't stop this man from becoming a murderer.
How bizarre is that? What kind of bad luck did that family have?
Psychological criminologist and former FBI agent Dr. Brianna Fox is examining the red flags in his descent.
My work isn't just academic. I've been in the field and sat across from serial killers. I've tried to apply my experiences to work out just how these seemingly normal people become the monsters that they turned out to be.
Were there early signs that he would descend into murder? And could police have caught Cary Stayner earlier?
I'm Dr. Brianna Fox, and this is Descent of a Serial Killer.
Dr. Brianna Fox will be using her unrivaled expertise in research to examine the case of Stayner, a serial killer who killed at least 4 women in the 1980s.
Stayner's case is shocking, but fascinating one. His descent is littered with red flags, which alongside my fellow experts we will be investigating and identifying. To fully understand Stayner's descent, we have to start from the beginning. Cary Stayner was born in August 1961 in Merced, California.
Cary Stayner was born in Merced, which is called the gateway to Yosemite, but it's also one of those towns in the great Central Valley of California, which is an agricultural cornucopia. It feeds much of the world, much of the United States. And to be born there is to have a sense of being part of the heart of California.
We know that the mother was 7 months pregnant when she was knocked down with Cary Stayner. He also had an unusual malformation of his head that was evident at birth. He had a significant deformation in his head with the temporal lobe, which is very involved with emotions and is also implicated in schizophrenia.
The Stayner family looked like any normal family. You had 2 sons, 3 daughters, and the father worked in a peach canning factory, which was, of course, one of the main sources of income and employment in an agricultural town like Merced. To all appearances, very much a normal, ordinary family.
Cary lived on Betty Street, and we lived around the corner on Shirley Street. Cary was just a little bit older than me, he was about 6 months older. But we were in the same grade. It was a blue-collar, working-class family neighborhood, very friendly, very nice. They were Mormon, but they weren't real practicing Mormon family.
The appearance of a happy family belied what was underneath.
So he had a family history that was very loaded genetically with a psychotic disorder and with obsessive-compulsive disorder, as well as impulse disorders. There were episodes of suicide and attempted suicide in his family, and there's also a history of drug and alcohol abuse in the family. And so it was an extraordinarily chaotic family upbringing.
When he's 3 years old, he develops what's called trichotillomania, which is an obsessive-compulsive disorder of hair pulling. It's not rare, but it is an obsessive-compulsive disorder that generally is brought on by anxiety. What is going on in a 3-year-old's life that is causing them so much anxiety, so much stress?
Police records show that sexual abuse was rife in the household, with family members spending time in jail for their crimes.
We know from later interviews by a psychiatrist that spent nearly a year talking with Cary Stayner that this clearly was a very dysfunctional family, and that this dysfunction had been going on for several generations of this family. Cary was being sexually abused by an uncle. You have a mother who essentially is kind of aloof in this whole situation. She might be aware of what's happening, and it would almost be hard not to be aware of it, but she simply either ignores it or denies it. When you have children being sexually abused by parents, and one parent doesn't stop it, then there literally is no place that the child can feel safe.
Children who have experienced a lack of control in their life can often develop anxiety disorders, which can lead to OCD, as a way of preventing bad events from happening. Trichotillomania is a repetitive hair pulling, which would have left him nearly bald, but might have given him the feeling of control over himself. Growing up, he was clearly in an abusive environment, within a small household, which would set a dangerous precedent for how he should treat people and how, in turn, he would expect to be treated. There is a great debate as to whether people are shaped by nature or nurture, or whether it is a combination of the two. Conditioned behavior, with positive or negative reinforcement within the family environment, can allow something to become the norm. There seems to be some biological traits in the inheritance of certain mental illnesses or other issues which could leave someone more vulnerable to these types of conditioning.
There was a drastic family event when Cary was 11 years old.
The family was subject to much public scrutiny on the December day in 1972 when Cary Stayner's younger brother, Stephen, was kidnapped off the street on his way home from school. And it became one of those renowned child kidnapping cases which the public really never gets out of its mind. This case hit the nation, and especially California, with such impact because to have a child go missing goes to the very heart of what a family is and what parents think they can do, which is protect their children. And this altered the family dynamic, I think, forever. The father became obsessed with this kidnapping, with finding out what had happened to his younger son.
I remember when it first happened, the police came to our house that night. I remember my parents called me out and said, "Martin, the police are here, Stephen's missing. Have you seen him today?" And I said, no, I didn't see him. So they went door to door. He was walking home from Charles Wright School. Parnell approached him and asked about donation or something to get him to come up to him, put him in his car, and the story is that he said, "Your parents don't want you. I'm gonna be your new father, take care of you." Then they moved around. I don't think people assumed foul play, but just like all the other kids, we still all walked to school or walked home sometimes by ourselves. It wasn't this protectiveness like, oh my gosh, we gotta, worry about everybody and we gotta all stick together and carpool and do all this stuff. None of that happened. After a while, we just kind of went about our lives.
This whole dynamic with Stephen becomes a huge impact in Cary Stayner's life. If you look at the family dynamic, first of all, you understand that Delbert had a favorite son, and that favorite son was Stephen. And there was really no bones made about showing favoritism to Stephen over Cary. For Delbert, when Stephen was taken, this was devastating. In fact, Cary said, "This was the first time I'd ever seen my father cry." And of course, who's going to get the blame for Stephen being abducted? Well, Delbert blamed Cary because Cary was the oldest, and also because as the older brother, he should have been watching out, at least as Delbert saw it.
When you went into the Stayner house, you walked right into the living room, and directly across the door was a fireplace, and above the fireplace was a picture of Stephen.
Cary Stayner suffered a great deal from this, perhaps felt neglected by his parents because they were so concerned about the child who wasn't there that they were not doing perhaps what other people say they should and paying attention to the children who were.
After his brother went missing, Stayner was sent to live with his Uncle Jesse.
His parents had him stay with an uncle who was a convicted child molester who had been discharged, and when he was staying with his uncle, he was apparently molested by this uncle. So he himself was also a victim of sexual abuse.
The increased stress escalated the severity of Cary's trichotillomania.
He used to always wear a hat. One thing about Cary he was known for, he would wear a baseball cap, or we called him bucket hat. The reason was because he said his hair was falling out. That was his story. Later I learned that he used to pull his hair out.
Parents will often idolize a child when they go missing or die unexpectedly, building a shrine to their memory as part of the grieving process. However, this can then become a fixation point, as the much-needed stages of grief cannot be moved through. There is a vast difference between being aware of being sexually abused and sexual abuse being perpetrated against you. Many people report feeling devalued and worthless when they are abused as a child, and after already suffering neglect from his parents, Cary Stayner's self-confidence would have been at an extreme low. Although it is normal for people's personalities to develop and change in their teenage years, the developments shown in Stayner are problematic. Stayner's exposure to sexual abuse in childhood, combined with the trauma of his brother going missing, exacerbated by the incomparable attention his parents, family, and society paid to his missing brother, led to jealousy, anxiety, and anger that would only escalate. The stress of his situation only increased when he moved into the high school environment.
He was very creative. He loved to draw. He was always drawing cartoons, and we always thought that that's where he would end up as a career in something artistic.
Cary Stayner began having emotional difficulties. A man who had been noted as the most creative in his class, who was a wonderful illustrator and artist, also supposedly exposed himself to one of his sister's friends. He just did not have the kind of social skills that perhaps he had once had, but after all these years with his brother gone, he had become, to all appearances, a different person.
One girl said, he snuck into the bedroom when I was staying overnight with his sister and he molested me. Some people saw him one way and some people saw him another, and it was after he left high school that the true Cary Stayner came out.
Again, Cary's life went through a seismic shift when one unexpected event occurred.
Oftentimes when pedophiles will abduct a young boy for sexual assault purposes, the end result is that they kill the child, usually early after the sexual assault, but oftentimes within 24 hours.
In this rare case, the sexual predator actually kept him for himself and raised him in a sense, giving him a new name and manipulating him, and he grew up with that man. But when he reached 14 years old, that man abducted another little boy, and at that point, Stephen Stayner said, enough is enough, I can't watch another child go through what I went through. And so he took that child and escaped and went to the police. And it was such a shock.
We know they were looking for him, but all of a sudden, the boy who had disappeared walked into a police station with another boy who had been kidnapped for the same sexual purposes that Stephen himself had been kidnapped, and said, I think my name is Stephen.
From there, the police were able to figure out who Stephen was, which was a huge shock, because it's been 7 years.
And Cary now really takes a back seat. He is just essentially known as the brother of Stephen Stayner. That, you know, he's been reduced to just this figure in the background.
And some people did say that he seemed to care that his little brother disappeared, but when his brother returned, apparently he didn't seem to have very much emotion about it. Like, he didn't seem terribly happy. And then for him, it just got worse. Not only had his brother been missing for all these years and gotten the attention from his father searching for him, but now his brother comes back and now the media is all over it. So he's nobody then and he's nobody now. And I think that really affected him in the sense that he just was the forgotten son.
The return of his brother after all these years once again turns the attention away from Cary, just when he was beginning to leave home and start to feel his own life again. His brother was idolized further by his parents and the nation as a hero, with Stayner again overlooked by everyone.
While Stephen Stayner, the kidnapped brother, seemed to be doing well, recovering emotionally, getting back on track after all that trauma, his older brother, Cary, seemed to be going off the rails. He had a couple of nervous breakdowns, one of them said to be a violent nervous breakdown. He had dreams and hallucinations, according to a lot of studies and reports that came out through the courts. And some of them were quite violent dreams about violence against women, violence toward women. In some dreams, he was the hero trying to protect the women, and in others, he was taking part in the violence himself.
People that said he never had an interest in a romantic relationship. He never had a girlfriend. He was instead thinking, you know, if a girl comes down the street, it would be interesting if she were gang. That would be hot. That is not normal, that he would see women in that sense, that they were to be harmed and molested and tortured, rather than he could establish a warm and loving relationship.
Stayner's choice of career is unexpected.
After he left high school, everybody thought he was going to become a cartoonist because apparently he did have good skills at that. But he didn't go into that field. He did not pursue it. He did other things, move furniture and such. And he also became a glass cutter. And one day he was working at this company. The manager said, hey, he was great. He was a nice guy, did great work, we liked him. But he told his friend one day, he was like furious and angry and said, I want to go back in there and kill everybody. Like he wanted to commit a mass murder. And at that point, his friend said, maybe you should get some help. And he did go to somebody and a therapist, and it was very short-lived, but he quit the job at the company.
He started to have hallucinations. He started hearing voices, started having all these delusions, and he grew up in a small town, and there was really not a lot of resources available for appropriate psychiatric coverage. He was someone who probably should have had more of a comprehensive evaluation and follow-up with a psychiatrist who was very knowledgeable. It wasn't clear if he had really more OCD with psychosis or schizophrenia with OCD. There is some overlap in terms of families that can have both conditions. Schizophrenia is generally 1% of the population, and OCD is maybe 2-3%, but having them both overlapping in severe form, that's probably less common.
Despite the trauma in Stephen's life, he had settled into a healthy mental state, something which Cary aspired to.
Something that's very curious about Stephen Stayner and his relationship with his brother is that there's been a lot of speculation that Cary Stayner was jealous of all the attention that his brother got, was jealous that his brother had a wife and children and managed to create a fairly normal family life for himself after all that he had been through.
He did die tragically on the motorcycle accident, just it seemed as he was getting his life together, which is amazing to see what he went through.
His brother's death in 1989 was not a psychological blow to Cary, who moved back in with his alleged abuser.
Cary Stayner ends up living with his uncle, Uncle Jesse, and Uncle Jesse ends up getting shot to death while Stayner is in the home. Whatever happened to Uncle Jesse being shot has never been solved, but I find it rather interesting that a serial killer goes to move in with his uncle and his uncle gets shot while he's there.
In 1991, Cary Stayner finally makes an attempt to deal with his mental health issues.
He went to some kind of psychiatric therapy, talked to a psychiatrist, but evidently didn't want to go into group therapy and didn't want to take psychiatric medication because he said it interfered with his dreams and he liked his dreams.
Cary Stayner's troubles continued into young adulthood. In 1991, he attempted suicide. At one point, he received some counseling. He had episodes of losing his temper. He had a series of failures in life. He tried to start a marijuana growing business well before the industry had even come close to taking off. And when that failed and other failures happened, he seemed to go back and become reclusive.
Diagnosis of mental illnesses is difficult, and there is often comorbidity of conditions where people experience multiple diagnoses at the same time. Jealousy of the normality of his sibling's life is unsurprising. Despite everything Stephen went through, Cary is the one who's still living with the effects of his childhood. The murder of his uncle must have been incredibly conflicting. Although the man who abused him is dead, there's a family member who took him in when his parents were neglecting him. To be living in the house that his uncle was shot in and never see the killer brought to justice would not have provided the closure Stayner clearly needed. The red flags in Stayner's descent to murder are based in his violent fantasies around women from such a young age and against those in positions of power. Despite attempts at intervention and referral for various mental illnesses, Stayner has not stuck to any treatment plan.
Although his fantasies had affected his other jobs, Stayner continued to look for employment.
Cary Stayner worked as a handyman at a lodge outside of Yosemite itself. There are a lot of places outside Yosemite where people stay because not a lot of places inside Yosemite to stay. And a handyman's job, keeping things up, working on the rooms, maintenance around the place. And this would have been an ideal job for him because he loved Yosemite. Even when he was in high school, his friends said he loved to go over and hang out in Yosemite, the most peaceful, laid-back place you can imagine. However peaceful and beautiful Yosemite was, there was an awful lot of turmoil going on inside Cary Stayner.
When Stayner moved to Yosemite and got a job as a handyman, he met up with a lady who had a couple kids, and he actually got essentially his first girlfriend, or so it appeared. The children actually liked him, except for the one time where he kind of got naked, taking a little swim, and the girl said, "That made me uncomfortable." She did mention a little kit that he carried around with had a gun in it, which was kind of concerning. But other than that, apparently she liked him very well, and he kind of was like a pseudo-father to her.
By 1999, Stayner's homicidal fantasies have returned in full force.
And he said, "I was going to kill my girlfriend and her kids, but somebody got in my way, so I didn't do it." It's hard to know whether he's telling the truth or it's just another story he wants to tell. It's very sad for the children who thought, "Oh my gosh, I thought he liked us, and now he says he was going to kill us."
These were two little girls, his girlfriend's daughters, to whom he sang songs and he drew pictures for them. He brought them little beanie babies.
At the Cedar Lodge, Stayner is about to explode as the pent-up frustrations of his life come to the surface.
In early 1999, 3 women arrived in their little red rental car: Carol Sun, her daughter Julie, and Silvina Peloso, who was an exchange student from Argentina and a friend of Julie's. The girls were kind of looking around at college campuses, but if you're that close to Yosemite, you have to see Yosemite.
And what a wonderful opportunity to go over to Yosemite, and the 3 of them could go do some hiking in a beautiful park. And so they did. And while they were there, unfortunately for them, they caught the eye of Cary Stayner, who was the handyman. And he looked in their window and he saw 3 women, not so much interested in the older woman, but those 2 teenage girls, 15 and 16. And he said, "Here's my opportunity." So the handyman, he has access to a lot of locations. People invite him into their homes, and he has reasons to go in there and fix things and do this and that. He can observe who is in those rooms. And if you're a serial killer, serial predator, it's kind of like smorgasbord for you.
Cary, who is the handyman there, came to the room around 11:30 at night and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, we have a leak in one of the rooms, and I need to check your bathroom."
And then he pulled a .22 caliber gun out on them and pointed it at them and said, "I'm just going to rob you."
You want to believe this when you're the victim like this. You want to believe that all that's going to happen is a robbery. So Carol allows Cary to bind them, their feet and their hands and their mouths.
He put the 2 young girls in the bathroom, and then he strangled the mother, and he took her body and put it in the trunk of the car. In other words, he wasn't interested in her sexually. He only wanted the 2 girls.
Now, he's got the 2 girls where he wants them. He sexually assaults them, but he also wants them to interact. He wants to watch this piece of his fantasy get played out. But it doesn't happen, and he becomes annoyed. So he takes Julie into the room next door, because as the maintenance man, he has control over all these rooms. He leaves her bound up in the room next door. He comes back to Sylvina, and he strangles her.
Went back into the room where Julie was, and he made her perform oral sex for many hours. Meanwhile, he went back and got the body of Sylvina, and he took her and put her in the vehicle. Now, Julie at that point had to know both her mother was dead and her friend was dead, and now she was the one left alone. At that point, he put her in the vehicle and drove her to a lake where he continued to sexually assault her, and eventually he cut her neck so badly, eventually cut her head off, and they found her body in 2 places, her body there and her head someplace else.
Then he drives the rental car many miles away, and he deposits it on a logging road, an isolated logging road. And then he calls a cab, and the cab picks him up, and he uses money he stole from Carol's son's wallet to pay the cab fare back to the Cedar Lodge. He takes Carol's wallet. He drives to Modesto, California, and he dumps the wallet on the street. Now, why is he doing this? Because he wants to throw the police off. He wants them to be looking in Modesto for the disappearance of Carol, her daughter, and their friend Sylvina.
One advantage that Stayner had when he killed 2 of the women in the motel room is that he strangled them, which eliminates the problem of having blood evidence in the room. He didn't shoot them, he didn't cut their throats there, so there was actually very little evidence in the room to begin with. And then he drove away Julie, and he did cut her head off, but that was near a lake. So back in the motel, there really wasn't much evidence. The next morning, when the staff went in to clean the room as they would normally do, they didn't see anything particularly unusual in the room, certainly not any evidence of foul play, and the keys were there. They'd already checked out, and the keys were there on the desk, so they thought they had just checked out and gone home.
2 days later, he decides he needs to do something with that vehicle and those bodies. So he takes a can of gasoline, goes back to where he dumped the car, lights the car on fire.
Luckily for at least the investigation, the burned out car was found. It was found by a hiker. That was reported to the police, and from that point on, the investigation actually started because the ladies never returned home. The wallet had no reason to be in Modesto. Stayner also decided, hey, I want you to find the other body too. So he sent a letter to the police and said, there's a body over there by the lake, and this is where you can find it. And by the way, we had a lot of fun with this one. And the words he used, we had a lot of fun, would throw the police off the course looking for more than one killer.
Stayner has now taken the step from fantasy to action. He's now on a murder spree and committing serious sexual violence and murder as a way of fulfilling his sexually motivated fantasies. He has even found a hunting and dumping ground that he knows well to allow him to commit murder more often and get away with it. The fact that law enforcement is oblivious to his involvement gives him a sense of superiority, to the point where he actively attempts to insert himself in their investigation, sending police a letter to taunt them.
The setting was so renowned, it became a big deal both for the public and for investigators. And so immediately the investigation naturally looked at the hotel staff, at people who might have seen something, known something, heard something. And Cary Stayner was interviewed in the course of this.
But Cary's very helpful. You know, I've been here a couple years, I'm the handyman. I can tell you when I saw them last, and you know, he was giving them information. And of course, when they checked for a criminal record, Cary didn't have a criminal record.
There were several potential suspects, but two of them rose to the top: Michael Larwick and his half-brother, Eugene Rufus Dykes. They both had long criminal histories. Michael Larwick had just gotten into a shootout with police, and Eugene Dykes, when questioned, admitted his involvement in the kidnapping and the murders of the Yosemite tourists. So the FBI thought, okay, we have our suspects. And they took the extraordinary step of telling the public that all was safe, that they believed they had the people responsible in custody.
It seemed at first as if this crime was a one-off. Several months passed, nothing else had happened, and the FBI said, we have arrested the people whom we believe to be responsible for this, and they are in custody. So you can imagine everyone had a sense of relief that this was all over. It was a singular, horrific crime that simply wasn't going to happen again.
Cary Stayner had to feel like, boy, I got away with this one. And quite frankly, he did get away with it. There was no evidence connecting him. He had accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He felt free, and he felt like he could go on and he was invincible, essentially. That can lead to a downfall, because once a serial killer feels invincible, that's often when they step over the line, make stupid mistakes, and get caught.
In July 1999, police find another body, which tells them they have a serial killer working in Yosemite.
Cary Stayner was out one day and he saw a young woman who was doing some educational programs in the area. She was out at a stream and he saw her, playfully playing with, throwing some rocks, and he said, here's another one, I really want this one.
Joey Armstrong was 26 years old. She worked at the Yosemite Institute. She was a naturalist. She taught young children. She loved Yosemite. She wrote at length about how beautiful and peaceful it was to her friends. And her boyfriend and another friend were her roommates in a little cabin in an isolated part of it, but still part of Yosemite. And those two roommates were gone for a period of time, a couple of days, 3 days. And this was the first time that she had been on her own in Yosemite, in that little cabin, since she had arrived.
He stops and he strikes up a conversation with her. And he finds out essentially, I'm going to go visit a friend up north. I'm just getting my stuff together. And Cary sees this impulsively as an opportunity that he cannot pass up.
What he did to overpower her is not known, but it must have been fast, because a friend who said she was lying in a hammock not far away didn't hear a thing. But in Joey Armstrong's cabin, there was evidence of a formidable fight. This woman did not go down without a battle. She fought back, and there was evidence all over that cabin. In fact, an investigator said that she may have saved other women's lives, because there was so much evidence of Cary Stayner in that cabin that they were able to identify him very quickly after that murder.
He knew that once her blood was there and his blood was there, he was done. He was cooked.
He puts her into his light blue International Scout, a fairly distinctive vehicle. She's bound at her hands and she's bound over her mouth so she can't scream. He's taking her to a location that he wants to sexually assault her and kill her. But she makes the brave move of actually jumping out of his moving vehicle. But her hands are bound and she can't run very well, and Cary is a big guy. So he stops the car, he gets out, now he's very angry, and he runs after her, and of course he captures her, and in a very brutal way he kills her. He uses a knife, he cuts her throat, he stomps on her head.
And he cut her head off and he left her out by a river, but the evidence was still right there where it could be found, and he knew he'd screwed up.
But then it turns out that someone had also seen a vehicle matching the description of Cary Stayner's truck. It was a very distinctive vehicle. It was a 1979 light blue International Scout. So it's a 20-year-old vehicle, one of those kind of rusty, runabout old vehicles that you would have when you're 20-some years old, suitable for a place like Yosemite. And that was one of the distinctive facts that drew authorities' attention to him. Authorities start looking for Cary Stayner. He's found in a nudist colony a little ways away and brought back for questioning, and surprises law enforcement by, in fact, confessing to the crime.
Decapitation is about anger and depersonalization, about getting out extreme emotions and treating the victim like an animal to be hunted, killed, and butchered. He did not fear arrest or apprehension at this point, in part because he was raised knowing that offenders in his family went unchecked, and police did not seem to have him in the picture. The less organized an offender is, the quicker they will make a mistake, which will bring them to the attention of law enforcement. By this point, Stayner has killed 4 women, but is only under arrest and suspected of the murder of Joey. He is about to make an unexpected confession.
It's the FBI that's the lead investigative agency because Yosemite is federal property. And so the FBI takes Cary Stayner in for questioning. And he surprises them by confessing not only to the Joey Armstrong murder, but to the murder of the 3 other women as well.
At that point, it was a matter of pride for him to mock the police, that they failed so miserably in their investigation. They had no clue he actually killed those 3 women too. So for him, it was quite an amusing moment to say, yeah, that was me.
He talked a good deal during these sessions because at one point he had supposedly said that he had fantasized about killing women since he was 7 years old, which was long before his brother Stephen's kidnapping.
There was a moment during his interrogation where Stayner basically said to the police, hey, I'll come clean with everything if you just bring me some child pornography so I can enjoy myself. They didn't give him the child pornography, but one wonders why he even asked that. There is never any evidence in his history that he had any particular interest in children, that he was any kind of pedophile. I think he did that just to mess with them and to see how far would they go to get his confession.
I went back throughout the day at the jail where he was being held, and I went and asked for an interview. He said, before I say anything, I want you to broker a deal for a movie of the week with producers in Hollywood. This was what his brother had made about his case when he returned after his abduction, and now here, all these years later, Cary Stayner is asking for that same thing that his little brother got.
Cary is trying to get out of the shadow of his brother Stephen and the made-for-TV movie. He wants the same adulation, the same attention.
Clearly, he wanted to tell his story to the world. He had told the FBI, but he also wanted his version of it, because the version he told me was slightly different than what he told the FBI. He said he never sexually assaulted any of the women, and he blamed it on this condition that he had, these thoughts that he had been fighting for years, and he almost made it sound as though he should be congratulated for keeping these feelings at bay for so long, that there was only so much he could do.
When the case goes to court, his defense tries to garner sympathy.
When he was in court, his defense team tried to claim that Cary Stayner suffered from childhood abuse and also from the horrific fact that his little brother was kidnapped, and they hoped that that would influence the court. It didn't work. He got convicted of all 4 crimes in state and federal courts, and he was sentenced to death.
Cary Stayner was to be tried in federal court for the Joy Armstrong murder because it happened on federal land. But he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and other charges in exchange for not getting the death penalty. But he did have a penalty phase at the trial, and afterwards was heard to say in court that he was sorry for the murder of Joey Armstrong. He didn't know why he did it. If he could undo it, he would. And that he had no idea what had compelled him to do it, that it was a senseless crime, a word he used, a senseless crime. When it came to the murders of the other 3 women, he was tried in California state courts, and he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity.
Insanity is a very difficult concept to prove in a court of law. You have to show that you, at the time of the murders, did not understand the difference between right and wrong. The thing is that there's a lot of evidence cleanup, destruction of evidence that goes on that clearly shows that you were making a conscientious effort to not be captured.
There was one suggestion that because his mother had fallen when she was pregnant with him, that there may have been some kind of brain injury then. The jury was shown a lot of physical evidence about the state of his brain.
When I did a PET scan on the brain of Mr. Cary Stayner, I found that there was abnormalities in the frontal lobe of Mr. Stayner's brain. He had an abnormal decrease in the metabolism of his brain. And this kind of abnormal decrease was statistically significant when we compared this to a group of normal controls. And we found that there was a big spot in the right frontal lobe area, which shows up as a blue spot on our statistical map. This is the kind of pattern that we observe in individuals who have a history of schizophrenia.
Nonetheless, he was convicted of first-degree murder on these 3 murder counts and ultimately sentenced to death on California's death row.
What were the red flags in Stayner's descent?
Cary Stayner had displayed a lot of the red flags for someone who could go seriously off the rails. He had a family history of mental illness, and there was sexual abuse within the family. He explained fantasies of killing women, and his brother was mysteriously kidnapped. These were not enough to make any arrest, but they were enough to raise flags to indicate that far worse could be possible.
What motivates most serial killers is a thrill that they get from what they do. It also is mostly a matter of power and control. Power and control they feel like they don't have in their regular lives. Cary Stayner definitely felt he did not have much power. He did not control things. Things happened around him, including his brother's kidnapping and his brother's return, where all the adoration and interest went to his brother. He had a rage against society, and he wanted to be that somebody.
Could law enforcement have stopped him earlier?
It would have been almost impossible to stop Stayner earlier, as he was never on law enforcement's radar. However, there are other ways that society may have been able to intervene to prevent these crimes. While mental health issues are never a direct cause of serious crime, particularly violent offenses like murder, there was certainly a risk factor. If authorities had been able to intervene and offer the help he needed, then he may never have descended to serial murder.
It's hard to know a motivation to a man who says in court that he himself doesn't know why he did it. But these were acts of terrific, tremendous violence, because it is not an act of sex, it is an act of violence.
Would he be stopped today?
If Stayner was growing up now, the sexual abuse within the home and the disappearance of his brother would have brought him to the attention of social services far earlier, and may have enabled his mental health issues to be properly supported.
I think if he had received appropriate psychiatric help, and I think that he could have It could have kept his psychosis from worsening. It could have kept his obsessive compulsive fantasies from worsening. And I think that these tragic homicides might have been preventable.
He had the opportunity to stop. He got away with triple murder, and he didn't.
I'm sure that Stayner would have continued with other murders if he had not been caught by police.